Mr. Server, you've been following Kosovo for the last 20 years. Also, you are considered a big friend of Kosovo. You have worked for our government. So what do you think of the latest ideas being discussed between Hashim Thaçi and Aleksandar Vučić that have to do with territorial swap, border correction, exchange of territories? What do you think of them?
I think these are bad ideas whose time should not come. I also think it's not really about territory. It's really about people. What are being swapped are people who are thought to be on the wrong side of the line. I don't know any line that should be drawn that tells people they're on the wrong side. People in Kosovo should be treated as citizens of Kosovo and their rights protected, no matter who they are.
But the argument of Hashim Thaçi is that, well, Kosovo does not accept, Serbia does not accept Kosovo as it is. We've got to give something away. This is basically behind the scene what his advisors have been telling people. This is his motivation why he wants to give up the North. What do you say to this?
I think it's a bad deal. It's a bad deal because it will undermine Kosovo's statehood. And it's a bad deal because Vučić is going to have to recognize Kosovo before Serbia can accede to the EU. And that date is not so far off. He wants to qualify for 2023. Even if he doesn't succeed at that, he'll want to qualify by 2025. At that point, all the leverage will be on the side of the EU, and the EU will demand recognition of Kosovo.
So I'd be more direct immediately than asking you, then what do you think is behind the thinking of a Kosovo leader himself, mentioning this as an option? What in the right mind could be going on in his mind?
Well, you should ask him. But my interpretation of what's going on is this. Aleksandar Vučić has been talking about this for years. Before him, Đinđić wanted to press this idea as well. What happened recently was that these ideas got a little bit of traction in Washington, and they got a little bit of traction with the LDK inside Kosovo. In particular, my friend Lufti Haziri was talking about wanting Preševo.
But he's not the head of LDK or the head of parliamentary group. He's just a mayor.
No, he's just the mayor, but he's an important opposition politician. And I think if you're the president of Kosovo and you see the Serbs outflanking you in Washington and maybe the opposition starting to outflank you inside Kosovo, you want to respond to that. And you want to respond to that in a way that that helps you politically. And I think the proposal to take part of Preševo in exchange for northern Kosovo was a political maneuver intended to solve some problems both domestically and internationally. That's my interpretation.
Okay, but just before you, we had an interview with an analyst in Belgrade that is close to Aleksandar Vučić, and he told us that giving up Preševo Valley would be 2-1 in relation to Kosovo, Serbia. He said that it's never even imagined that Vučić would give up Preševo. This is something that Hashim Thaçi is telling the Kosovo audience, but it's unimaginable that he would swap any territory of Serbia, and especially since a very strategic highway goes through Preševo, in the middle of Preševo. So do you really think that Vučić in any scenario would give up Preševo Valley?
Again, you'll have to ask him, but I don't think there is a deal to be had here. I think Vučić has the problem of the road and the Preševo Valley, the outlet to the sea, that the Serbian army has always wanted to protect. I think Hashim Thaçi has the issue of the Albanians in northern Kosovo and Prishtina's major water source, as I understand it, is Gazivoda. So I don't think there's a good deal here. But more importantly, I think discussion of this is destabilizing both in the region and beyond. So I think it's very unwise for leaders to engage in a discussion, especially publicly. I know they've discussed it privately many times. The public discussion seems to me to be very unwise and to risk creating facts on the ground that would be extremely damaging to Kosovo and to Serbia.
What concrete effects would this have for Republika Srpska, Albanians of Macedonia, minorities in Moldavia, situation of Georgia? How would this be? Would this have consequences in reality?
I do believe it would have consequences. I think the consequences, first and foremost, would be inside Serbia and Kosovo. Because if the North goes to Serbia, the fate of the majority of Serbs in Kosovo who live south of the Ibar River is going to become highly uncertain. Even if nobody touches anything, their future becomes questionable.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that?
I think that because the exchange of territory will be an ethnically based one, and their presence in Kosovo south of the Ibar will become inconsistent with the ethnic principle. And Father Salva has been very clear about this. He understands that giving up the north will endanger the Serbs south of the Ibar. But it also endangers any Albanians who happen not to be in Preševo. It also raises questions about Bosniaks who live in Sanjak. And it raises questions, of course, about Republika Srpska and about Albanians in Macedonia. Now, let me be clear. The issue is not a legal one. Vučić and Thaçi, so far as I'm concerned, they can discuss what they want. They are two sovereigns. But the question that I ask is whether this is wise to even begin to discuss because of the repercussions, non-legal repercussions, inside Kosovo, inside Serbia, in Macedonia, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, not to even begin to mention countries farther away from the Balkans, which will be destabilized by this. The one big win in this conversation is Vladimir Putin.
We've seen you supporting, being very supportive of Hashim Thaçi in this dialogue so far. Does this change of a direction of his surprise you at all?
It surprised me completely, to tell you the truth. But I tried to give you my explanation of it, which has to do with both international and domestic political factors. I haven't discussed it directly with him since he came out in public in favor of the border correction idea. But, you know, people who respect each other can differ on even very important issues. And that's a key lesson here.
But
we have to be able to talk to each other about this.
The key question, Mr. Server, that the audience wants to hear from you is, how come the U.S. position over this has changed with this administration?
It's changed because this is a new administration with very little experience in the Balkans. And it's an ethnic nationalist administration, which when Dačić came to Washington pushing this idea, was willing to listen because it heard ethnic nationalist principles behind this.
Sorry to stop you there, but most people think that there was a bipartisan agreement about Kosovo in the US. Bush was clear on Kosovo. He was a Republican like Trump. Not only Clinton, but Clinton and Bush were consistent about Kosovo. How come this Republican president changes 180 degrees from there?
Because this is not a traditional Republican administration. It's a radical administration which likes to upset the apple cart. And it includes some people like John Bolton himself, who were opposed to Kosovo independence. And what better way of negating the Clinton legacy than to advocate listening to people who want to partition Kosovo.
So what does it say also, the fact that previously US officials did not have, high US officials did not have meetings with high Serbian officials, and recently Kushner, the close Trump advisor, met with Dačić. What does this say about this change of policy?
Well, I think it says exactly what the administration has said it says. It means they're willing to listen. They have not promised approval, however, and that's important to recognize, that they've said they'll listen to anything that Serbia and Kosovo can agree to, but they're not giving out blank check. There are no red lines, but there are no blank checks either.
Let's assume, hypothetically for a moment, that Serbia and Kosovo agree. Is this administration that is willing to listen to the idea of land swap or division of Kosovo also the same administration who would actually follow through and guarantee Kosovo entry into the UN, i.e. convince Russia to accept Kosovo in the UN, if this administration is friendlier with Russia than any previous US administrations? Do you think we can trust it to guide Kosovo through this system and through this process and choreograph its entry into the UN? Because this is what Hashim Thaçi has been telling the public in Kosovo. In exchange for giving up the north, we can get a seat in the UN in recognition of Serbia. Can the US guarantee that?
I personally don't believe it, but Hashim Thaçi has talked to the American officials more than I have. I don't know what they've promised him. I'd be very skeptical, however. One thing you have to understand is that partition of Kosovo, from the point of view of the 5 non-recognizing states in the European Union, and from the point of view of China, is worse than just approval of Kosovo entry into the UN without partition. The idea of ethnic partition for Greek Cypriots, the idea of ethnic partition for Spain is worse than just recognizing an independent Kosovo. And for China, it's worse as well. So it's not only Russia the US will have to deliver, it's also China. I'm very skeptical that either can be done.
So it's interesting that you're saying even if Serbia recognizes Kosovo, the 5 non-recognizers would not automatically accept Kosovo.
I think that's correct. And in fact, for some of them, I think partition would make it more difficult for them to recognize Kosovo.
But you're saying that, but to rely on, do you think this leverage of the US position on Kosovo is also because the EU has been basically very weak in imposing the implementations of agreements that were signed in Brussels for the last 7 years?
Look, I think there are big problems with implementation. But if you think about the situation 7 years ago and the situation today, it's manifestly improved. Kosovo is meeting regularly, often with Serbia on an equal basis. There are lots of technical achievements. There's an achievement, there's an agreement in principle that the Kosovo Constitution applies on the entire territory of Kosovo, including the north. I think a good deal of progress has been made. And I think the right way to handle this is to continue in that direction.
Precisely, because you say the position has improved, should Kosovo act so desperate to give up territory? Is Kosovo really so desperate? And also, is the UN seat really key for a functioning state? I mean, the most important thing.
It's not the most important thing. I think it would be extraordinarily helpful for Kosovo and would end a lot of doubts about Kosovo throughout the world.
Is it worth giving up territory for? Is a UN seat worth giving up territory for?
I don't think the issue is territory for a UN seat. I think this whole emphasis on territory is wrong. This is about principles. It's about principle that all citizens of Kosovo are equal. And giving up that principle for a UN seat, in my view, is not worth it.
How do you explain that Germany and the UK are very explicit in a no change of border policy? And what does this say about transatlantic relations of these allies that were together in the NATO bombing with the United States?
Look, good things happen when the EU and the US agree. Bad things happen when they don't agree. Right now, they don't agree on many things. This is only one of dozens of things on which they don't agree. Britain and Germany are principled defenders of liberal democracy, and I hope they continue in that direction. The United States has become unreliable in that respect. And I think that's very unfortunate. I think it'll get corrected. It's going to take time to correct.
So if a United States is like that, is there any point in educating it, re-educating it? And what is your advice that what should be done by Albanians in the US? Can they have an impact in this re-education of the Trump administration, that they're playing with fire here, if they support this idea?
I certainly think it's very important for Albanians in the US to continue to support Kosovo statehood. And that means opposing partition, in my view. In addition, I mean, I'm a professor, and I've been aware of this lack of consciousness of what we did in the Balkans in the 90s and why for a long time. So 5 years ago, I began writing a book about what we did in the Balkans and the ways in which it's been both problematic and successful. That book will be out in December, and I hope it will lead to some education.
But it's interesting that in the last attempt he had, and the big controversy of tribunal, the special court which was established, Hashim Thaçi said that I thought that if we allow this tribunal to happen, we will get visa liberalization, we will get help into recognitions, EU faster entry, NATO recognition. Is he acting naive in this case too? If he thinks that if he gives up territory, he will get recognition?
Well, I don't think it's, look, one thing has to be very clear. Recognition comes first. You cannot give up territory unless you're recognized as the sovereign in that territory. So recognition must come first. Exchange could come very quickly thereafter, but recognition is first. One thing that can't come quickly thereafter is UN membership. So I think there's a real peril here that Kosovo gets only a fraction of what it thought the deal was. And I would warn against that for sure.
If you were to evaluate what Kosovo got out of negotiations in the last year, would you say we were back-footed and we were fooled by giving away and waiting, hoping that dialogue will get us anywhere, and in fact, Serbian diplomacy was more successful, even though the moral side of the war was in our side, or even though we won the international Court of Justice case, we won it, we didn't use the momentum to gain more for Kosovo.
Look, Kosovo has often gotten less than it hoped for. But one thing it has never done is to go backwards. So yes, you got less in 1999 than you hoped for. You got less with the Kaya report you had hoped for. You got less than in the Ahtisaari plan that you'd hoped for. But at each stage, you've still made progress. And you haven't slid backwards.
Would this deal be sliding backwards?
I believe that this deal would be sliding backwards, and that it would hurt Kosovo's main ambition, which is for full statehood, the completion of sovereignty, entry into NATO and the EU. I think this would make it harder, not easier.